When the new direction of God of War was first shown off, many were surprised yet very excited to be able to join Kratos again on a new adventure. Little did we know back then that it would be far more than any of us could ever have imagined. Hey guys, Jehuty here, and I just played God of War, a Jehuty Gaming review. I actually started playing this back around launch, wanted to rush through it in a weekend, but after the first hours, something was immediately apparent. This game was something that warranted your full-time attention, something that was to be savored and not rushed through. Alas, it took me almost 4 years to find that time, but oh boy was it worth it. And speaking of boy, the game left such an impression on me that I decided to give my comprehensive thoughts on it. So without further ado, please enjoy my review. So the story follows Kratos as we witness him in the middle of nowhere, cutting down a tree. After it falls successfully, he is then greeted by a little boy who turns out to be his son. You can tell immediately that these two do not gel well together. To make matters worse, the mother of the boy is dead. So the opening scene of the game is about sending her off. Her wish is that her ashes are spread from the peak of the highest mountain, to which Kratos and his son Atreus plan to journey. One day, a stranger arrives though at Kratos' doorstep and is looking for something, and thus Kratos asks him nicely to leave.
Leave my home.
Things get, well, a bit problematic, and thus Kratos realizes that their home is no longer safe, so they're forced to embark on the journey even though Atreus isn't ready yet. In a nutshell, this is about just that. Father and son going on a journey and finding out about the world around them and ultimately about each other. There are a few other characters, but most are not as important or as grand as in previous God of War entries. Some are only even ever mentioned, but that's honestly okay. You see, at its core, God of War 2018 is about a father and son relationship, and there it succeeds beyond a sliver of doubt. Kratos doesn't know how to be a good father to a son he has no real connection to beyond the mother, and at first all he can do is just be a strong, tough guy that seems detached from his son. There are touching moments where he hides his affection for his son or even his weaknesses and fears. He makes sure to bottle up his feelings, but in reality, he doesn't know how to bond with his son.
Do not mistake my silence for lack of grief. Mourn how you wish. Leave me to my own.
Atreus, on the other hand, is a child trying to grow up fast to get his father's approval. He stumbles along the way, but at his core he still has that childlike giddy thing where he can't hide his excitement or disdain for certain things. Sometimes acting before thinking. It comes across really believable. This makes a very interesting dynamic as he is the opposite of Kratos, and this forms the emotional core of the story as they try to find one another on this journey. If there is one thing that connects these two characters together, then it is Atreus' dead mother, Faye, a character that really intrigued me more and more even before the end. I mean, she's already dead, you don't see what she looks like, but as there are multiple conversations relating to her, both trivial and important alike, you really feel the weight of her loss on the characters, and it at least made me wish that I would have encountered her alive. There are also other storytelling elements here, such as environments telling you what likely happened without anyone ushering a word. The game also does something smart copied from The Last of Us. That is, conversations during world traversal. There isn't always a cutscene for every little thing. Instead, world building and the likes are discussed and explained as you play. Later on, you even get another companion who is very knowledgeable about the world. This makes even the most eventless journeys through unknown territories interesting and engaging. A lot of the game is actually to set up the sequel, with realms that are teased but you cannot access, or characters mentioned that you don't yet meet, at least not till Ragnarok. This new take on God of War has two main components that make up the gameplay, that being combat and exploration. The world isn't really an open world per se. Think of it more as a very big hub that gives you access to more linear areas with branching paths. This also gives the game a very handcrafted feeling, and thus you don't forget the areas you traversed easily. There are also different realms to travel to, some of them being locked up at first, and some of them being teased, and those are most likely the ones being set up for the sequel, Ragnarok. It's also a bit of a Metroidvania game in that it has elements that encourage you to explore, with rewards most likely around each corner, or clearly showing you paths you cannot yet take and you must come back later after acquiring something new. There is a very small gripe of mine though, the climbing speed. Yes, it feels more grounded and believable, but it honestly could be a bit quicker as the game doesn't lack content and doesn't need padding. When it comes to combat, the primary weapon, the Leviathan axe, just feels great to use. Really weighty and close and personal. You can also throw it as a projectile at enemies, but it also has a nifty trick, just like Thor's hammer, Mjolnir. Think Marvel's Thor. Kratos can instantly recall it and it flies back hitting anything in its wake. This makes for some creative ideas during combat and puzzles. You may also want to go at it barehanded / with the shield. The axe is a good weapon for inflicting damage, but the latter here stuns enemies quicker. Once they are in that staggered state, you can finish them off instantly with a button prompt. But if you were expecting quick time events, they aren't around this time. Don't worry, Kratos is still Kratos, and Kratos does Kratos things. Feats of power and brutality are still definitely represented. It's just not the primary thing you think of now when somebody says God of War, and honestly I like it that way. Atreus also doesn't feel like another character you have to protect, but instead the more you play, the more he feels like a natural extension of Kratos himself. He gets different arrow types and can be further customized to fit your playstyle. You can also customize the way you fight by using your XP to unlock various different skills, or tailor your weapons with runes to give them a personal touch. These are like special attacks that run on a cooldown and can be swapped for others or even upgraded. To make your life a bit easier, you can level up with different types of armor and upgrades, RPG light style. You can find them by exploring, buying, or crafting them by the blacksmith dwarfs. So here's the part I have to warn you for spoilers. I know some of you are like, you just talked about the story in its own section without spoilers. Well, it's a minor spoiler, but it affects gameplay, and without mentioning it, I can't go properly in-depth into the combat system. If it's a problem, you can skip to the timestamp on the screen to avoid it. So now let's get into it. Well, it's the Blades of Chaos, yeah, they're in the game. And this is the weapon to balance out the Leviathan axe. It feels equally as good while still harkening back to older games, as well as coming into its own in this entry. A lot of people didn't enjoy God of War Ascension, but to me that game had one thing going for it: its versatile sub-weapons. In prior entries, new weapons felt either not as good as the Blades of Chaos, or just felt like an alternative version that played similar. This entry gives you less weapons but makes each one shine, so much to the point that you'll be switching them mid-battle to take advantage of your entire arsenal, as enemies are weak to different attributes that the weapons embody, namely fire and ice. For as much as I like the combat and the way you can tailor Kratos to your fighting style, I still had some issues. For one, I played on hard because I felt normal was too easy, but hard was occasionally too hard for me. It's not like a Souls game where you feel accomplished for overcoming a difficult situation, more like the stars aligned on that try and you came true. Some stuff are also just due to the new camera perspective. You see, sometimes the game makes things difficult for you by just upping the enemy count. In previous entries, the camera gave you a view of the whole area, and it was mostly arena shaped. Now you have more organic environments to battle your enemies, and they can come out of all sorts of corners. It's sometimes difficult to keep up with the new camera perspective, but to aid you, the developers have implemented a threat ring that shows you enemy placements outside of your field of vision, as well as an indicator as when they're going to attack. It's still not always easy to keep up with the enemies though, even if Atreus shouts out when enemies are attacking. It's also not helped by the fact that there are a whole lot of projectile attack based enemies, the ones I personally dread the most. Hopefully the PC version has an FOV slider to help this a bit. The only other minor gripe I had were the boss battles. They're not bad at all, it's just that I felt in some instances that I was fighting the same boss just with different variations to them. Not very creative. However, some bosses have really nice set piece moments to them that make them even more engaging. There are also the optional Valkyries to find, and these guys just pack a punch. Make sure you're very well prepared, because these ladies will take all your skills and upgrades to overcome. If we're already talking about Valkyries, then we might as well talk about the other side content. There are side missions in form of fetch quests, dragons that need to be freed, and even some form of collectibles. It sounds bland, but it's accompanied with mostly optional and really good writing. Plus, it's well worth your time for the various upgrades they give you. For a completionist, it can feel a tad grindy at times, especially if you didn't do some of the side content whilst playing through the main game. My tip would be to play at your own pace and style, but then do a new game plus and carry over all that progress. As you can already see from the footage, God of War is a real looker, even by today's standards. Locations are varied in tone and color and can really feel grand at times. The art style also really comes into its own and really sells you on that Norse mythology feeling. Since it's not a proper open world game, that gave the developers the opportunity to control what the player can see at any given time, while still giving the illusion of one expansive seamless world. There are also some smart uses of load times to not break the sense of immersion. Animations are stellar, whether in cutscenes or in combat where you feel every impact given or received. Performances and voice acting are also top notch across the board, as to be expected of a Sony first party title. On a base PS4, the game looks and runs solid at Full HD 30Hz. I played through this on a PS4 Pro, where you have a very convincing checkerboarded 4K, or an optional performance mode which runs at Full HD 60Hz with occasional dips below. The PS5 received a 60Hz patch that gives you the best of both worlds. The PC version is what opens things up with native 4K, support for Nvidia's DLSS upscale technology, and 120 FPS. So in other words, play the way you like as long as your rig can handle it. Special mention also has to go to the one-shot camera take. What this means is that, in theory, if you play through the game without dying, you would never see a single camera cut. It's not as impressive as if a movie does it, but the fact that Santa Monica actually did this needs acknowledgement. I'm not gonna lie, I thought the originals were good games, just not the masterpieces people always made them out to be. But this new direction, coupled with the slower pacing and more in-depth characters, always makes me question why I never made time back in 2018, and why I believe this entry to be a masterpiece that you shouldn't pass out on. Even if you didn't play the other entries, it's still worth it alone for the story, but there's still even more bang for your buck. We are definitely in for a treat with Ragnarok, and thus I'm looking forward to how this story ends. Anyways, that's the end of my review. You know the drill. If you liked the video, leave a like and consider subscribing to the Jehuty Gaming channel for more reviews. This is your boy Jehuty, and I'll see you on the next I Just Played review.